Hey friends, welcome back to the Rubber Duck Recruiter. May the recruiting odds be ever in your favor. I'm in a little circle down here and this thing right here, this big old PowerPoint thing. That's what we're going to go through today. We're going to understand turnover costs at companies. I made this PowerPoint about 3 hours ago, and I'm very excited to present you with this information. You're going to learn some valuable stuff, especially if you're a recruiter. If you're a professional, it'll be valuable to you. But if you're an entrepreneur, I think it's going to be super valuable to you. So let's jump right in. So what we want to explore in this video is we want to explore the hidden expenses associated with employee turnover. And what I mean by that is that when we think of turnover, we think of we think of like pretty on the nose expenses, obvious expenses like recruiting somebody else, advertising, interviewing, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really where all of the cost is. The cost is in these kind of invisible areas that we're going to go through. And then we're also going to understand by the end of this video why turnover is so much more expensive than hiring. Good stuff. Okay, so let's define turnover. Turnover is the rate at which employees leave a company and are replaced by new hires. So when you hear that a company has very high turnover, what you're hearing is that that company has a lot of people that leave for whatever reason. Maybe it's bad culture, maybe it's bad compensation, maybe it's something else, and have to be replaced. So high turnover is like turning over a pancake. That's probably not a good, but you know what I'm saying? It's a turnover. This goes here, and then someone has to turn over. I guess that's where that comes from. I don't really know. All right. So this is the cost of turnover when somebody leaves a company. Here's just kind of a broad view of it, but we're going to go through each one right now. So when a company leaves a company, we have recruitment costs. And this is all the expenses associated with posting on job boards, advertising, paying off an agency, using people at the current company to interview that candidate, and running a background check, and so on and so forth. So there's the recruitment cost aspect of turnover. Training and onboarding. When somebody has to be replaced and the person that's coming in, they have to be trained. They have to be up and as productive as the person that left, hopefully as soon as possible. Usually that's a ramp up time of about 3 months. And the person responsible for doing that is usually another employee. And that employee is now taking time away from their primary responsibilities to get this person up and running, which is a cost associated with that. I guess you could say missed out labor. So there's financial labor to get them onboarded and trained, and then there's the human labor of having them be trained by another employee. Lost productivity. When somebody leaves, they take along their knowledge and their experience and their skills with them, and this leads to a temporary and sometimes a very prolonged loss of productivity in that position. And another thing to think about here is that when somebody leaves and takes all of this with them, somebody has to pick up that slack that's still at the company, and that's where you get, folks that have to essentially get paid to do or get paid the same to do more work because this person left, and they have to kind of pick up the slack. So there's a cost associated with that. Cultural impact. When somebody leaves a company or a team, there's some kind of, there's an impact. If you leave, then there's the impact on the team of why did they leave? Should I be leaving? There's a tension. If they are forcibly removed, then there's the thought of, am I going to be removed? Is layoffs happening? Blah, blah, blah. Either way, there is some kind of component of tension that is caused in the team, and that can have not very precise, but still echo effects of decreased productivity, decreased satisfaction within the role, decreased feeling of just maybe efficiency, comfort, things like that. Customer relationships. If you're a recruiter, if you're a salesperson, if you're anybody that is dealing with customers or candidates or whatever, then it takes a long time to build those relationships. And when you leave a company, when you are no longer there, then those relationships kind of hit a cliff and just fall off. And there's this abyss where that candidate or that client has no middleman to interface between the company and them. So somebody has to come in and reestablish that connection, which can take a while to build that. And there's a cost associated with that reestablishing of connection with that client or candidate. Time and effort from the managers. Managers typically want to worry about strategy and making their team more productive. They want to worry about strategy in terms of how they can essentially get the most out of their team. That is why they're there, to get the most productivity, efficiency, and value from their team. When somebody leaves a company, though, they have to reallocate their focus to um, offboarding them, or um, finding a replacement, or integrating a new employee and kind of moving the pieces around to get that person up to speed. So there's a cost associated with that process as well. Institutional knowledge and loss. This is a great one, hard to quantify, but still costly. Uh, when somebody sits at a company and they've been there for a while, they learn intangibles. They learn intangibles about how to deal with customers, how to sell a certain product. There's all of these things that they get just from their time in the seat. And a new hire is going to take possibly a significant amount of time to get up and running with that expertise. And that also might just be institutional knowledge lost because maybe no one else on the team knew what they knew. So it can be pretty costly there too. I think we have one more left. Employee morale. High turnover rates at any company can create a sense of instability. We kind of already talked about this, but this can have a snowball effect. If somebody leaves or people are turning over, then it can cause other people in the company to be unsure of themselves and possibly leave the company, leading to further costs. Okay, so what are the costs of hiring? Costs of hiring are basically we've already went over them. It's just all of those intangibles that we talked about at the end. The cost of hiring doesn't have that. So you still have to pay for advertising, you still have to pay for agency fees, you still have to pay for background checks and onboarding, and training programs are vaguely a part of the cost of hiring. I mean, it is, but sometimes you can, if you're using an agency, not necessarily. So those are the costs of hiring, and that's the cost of turnover. So let's look at them side by side. All right, so you see on the left, we have the cost component. We listed everything that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. We had recruitment, training, lost productivity, culture impact, customer relationships. And on the right two columns, we see turnover costs and hiring costs. And this is just a visualization of how turnover costs have a lot more, I guess you could say, categories of cost than just hiring somebody would have associated with it. But I think it's really useful for us to have a case study or to have an example of what these costs look like. So let's jump into the next slide. All right, turnover. So we'll just say on average that it costs about $5,000 to advertise, use an agency, interview the candidate, close the candidate, so on and so forth. And then we'll say hypothetically, we'll call this company X. So company X, company X spends $5,000 on recruitment costs, and they spend another $3,000 on training and onboarding. And that is because the training, the onboarding it has a labor cost associated with whoever is training, and it has a cost associated with getting, if it's a recruiter, maybe LinkedIn recruiter or sales navigator or whatever. There's all those costs. So we're going to roughly put $3,000 there. Now, lost productivity, you can think about lost productivity as you're being paid $4,000 a month and you're expected to be ramped up within 3 months. So that total cost right there is $12,000. 3 months of ramping you up costs $12,000. So that's yet another cost. The cultural impact, kind of hard to say, but if you leaving stops the efficiency, stops the productivity, has people kind of looking around, not really knowing how to fill your gap, that's all time lost, and that's associated with the cost. So a very conservative number might be $2,000. And the customer relationships, we're just kind of thinking like, all right, to reestablish the connections that were forfeited when you left or when an employee left, what is the cost in labor and time to get that done? We'll say $1,000. So the total cost for one employee, one turnover would be $23,000. Then we look to the right, we have our agency fees, we have our advertising, et cetera, et cetera. We'll just say that costs about $5,000. So let's see this over a year now. And this is where we really start to see the cost of turnover versus the cost of hiring. $23,000 to $5,000 is already a lot. But let's say that it's over 1 year now, and there's 10 people that we lose versus 10 people that we hire. Pretty basic math there. We have a $230,000 cost for losing 10 people. And on the right, just for hiring 5 or 10 people, we have a $50,000 cost. So we can really start to see how this is illustrated in this little case example that, man, it's almost 4 times more expensive to simply lose an employee. And this is getting at the heart of why retention is so darn important. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking to increase profits at your company, you know, oftentimes one of the indirect and kind of not often thought of ways to do it is just don't lose them. Do whatever you can to keep them at your company. And so what is the conclusion here? The conclusion is, hopefully by now you understand that there's a substantially higher cost in there for turnover than there is for a hiring cost. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, and that's fine. But as a professional in the professional world, hopefully you understand the value of you staying at a company now, right? If you want to ask for a raise, you now have a vague idea of how much it's going to cost if you leave, and that should give you some kind of what's it called? Some negotiating points, or some I guess bullets in the holster, so to speak, for your own behalf and for negotiating on your own behalf and asking for that raise. And finally, if you are an entrepreneur and you're an entrepreneur that you know is on a tight budget and wants to really think about where can I get my profits, how can I increase my profit margin and decrease my costs. Well, I'll tell you one thing: it is by focusing on retention. It is not by uh, uh, putting culture last, or putting compensation last, or so on and so forth, and trying to just get by as easy as possible. If you get somebody on and they're valuable, they can become so valuable that if you lose them, the cost is just it's an intangible. It's an intangible. You don't really think about it, but it's when you really look at it, it can just be catastrophic if there's too much turnover at a company. So hopefully you guys found that interesting. Thanks for learning with me. This was fun. I'm working on my presentation skills. I'll continue to do this as I learn. And as always, may the recruiting odds be ever in your favor.